Pixar has been hiding the same company across multiple movies for years, and most people never notice it. A logo on a battery, a sign in the background, a random ad during a race, and so on. Small details that seem meaningless at first, but once you connect them together, something disturbing starts to appear. Because somehow, Pixar built an entire corporate apocalypse across their movies without ever sitting the audience down to explain any of it. But how did they do this? How does Pixar write lore without explaining anything? The entire corporate footprint traces back to an early brainstorming meeting inside the animation studio, where a filmmaker named Andrew Stanton was mapping out a new story about a lonely little cleaning robot. Andrew looked at modern life around him and felt a strong wave of concern about the way people live. He watched big businesses grow bigger every single day, creating modern systems that regular people depend on without ever pausing to think about who runs them. During these development talks, a fascinating thought popped into his head. Andrew wondered what would happen if a single mega company grew so massive that it actually became the physical structure of human society itself. The creative team loved this idea, and an artist named Teddy Newton came up with a perfect name for this fictional empire. He called it By and Large. The name became BNL, a short, sharp title that is incredibly easy to repeat, easy to remember, and perfect for a brand that needs to appear absolutely everywhere without drawing too much attention to itself. From that exact point on, the storytelling team decided to build their universe completely backward. You see, instead of creating a normal world and placing a business inside it, the animators built the corporate empire first, asking themselves what kind of planet would completely break down under the weight of their influence. So the secret corporate history starts incredibly small. Beginning with a simple food brand called Bai Yogurt, the business made plenty of money selling sweet treats, allowing them to expand and absorb large industries. A massive suit manufacturing company operating in the American Midwest during the 1960s. This corporate merger created the modern By and Large conglomerate. From that specific moment in history, the brand spreads like wildfire across every single part of human life. And by the year 2057, the corporation manufactures nearly every single object a human being can touch. They control the food supply, public transport, medical systems, banking networks, news media, space travel, and eventually the choices of the government itself. Earth becomes a place shaped by consumption. Over 200 billion people are encouraged into constant consumerism, and waste begins to stack faster than anyone can manage. The planet fills with layers of discarded products, buildings swallowed by trash, and highways buried under packaging. By the year 2105, BNL was the government itself. The CEO, Shelby Forthright, sits at the top, and the board approves large decisions like Operation Cleanup. BNL builds the Axiom and a fleet of starliners. Humans leave Earth for what was described as a short 5-year cruise, while robots handle the cleanup. But the plan doesn't work, and Earth is labeled too toxic for life. So, Directive A113 locks humanity into space, and the cleanup becomes permanent. BNL systems keep running even after leadership disappears, and the company slowly becomes a memory powered by machines. But why is all of this necessary? Well, because it is the foundation Pixar places under WALL-E, and it is necessary both for the movie and every other movie that came afterwards. You see, when WALL-E finally begins, we meet a robot who is surrounded by the leftovers of that system. Broken cities carry BNL signs like fossils. Superstores still glow faintly with BNL ads, and the banks and gas stations are also owned by this same company. Even WALL-E himself carries a BNL logo on his body, which makes him part of the same system that created the wasteland he is programmed to clean. As WALL-E moves through abandoned streets, holographic ads continue to activate. They talk about space cruises, automated comfort, and a life free from effort.
Too much garbage in your face? There's plenty of space out in space.
One ad introduces the Axiom as a floating paradise with no walking required, no waiting, and no struggle. The voice behind the ads stays cheerful even while the ground beneath them is covered in garbage. That contrast becomes a repeating pattern. The brand language stays polished while the environment decays. Inside WALL-E's small truck home, a B&L sponge cake sits like a preserved artifact from another time. It is simple, processed, and untouched by the collapse outside. That small object carries the same branding as the massive systems that reshaped Earth. When Eve arrives on Earth, she scans through these spaces, searching for signs of life. The world behaves like it still remembers its old consumer rhythm, even without people to continue it. Later, when WALL-E boards the recon ship and leaves Earth, the scale of B&L lore expands again. Satellites carrying the company logo orbit the planet, meaning that even space does not escape its presence. Then, we see the Axiom floating beyond Earth, as a moving extension of the same system that once controlled everything below. On the ship itself, human life continues under B&L design. Hover chairs guide people like conveyor belts. Screens float in front of faces. Food and movement require no effort, and conversations happen through digital layers instead of direct contact. Everything follows a structure built long before the passengers were born. The company still exists through systems, ads, and machines, but no one is steering it anymore. The structure continues on its own, holding together a world that already ended on Earth. This is where Pixar's method becomes clear. B&L arrives in fragments. A logo here, a billboard there, a product on a shelf, or a system running in the background. Each piece adds another layer of history without ever stopping the story to describe it. This is how we're introduced to the lore of B&L. And right here, you might be thinking, if the lore is already out there right now, why put B&L in other movies that come after WALL-E? Well, this is where it gets interesting. The world begins to reveal something strange when the B&L keeps showing up in places where it should not belong. It starts small, almost easy to miss, but once it appears more than once, a pattern begins to form. One of the earliest places this presence becomes noticeable sits inside the world of cars. In Rescue Squad Mater, released just a few months after WALL-E, Lightning McQueen finds himself inside a hospital setup after a fire accident. The environment around him carries medical stuff as far as medical stuff goes for cars. But as McQueen is pushed into the theater, we see small B&L logos stamped on auxiliary items just by the door.
Paging Dr. Mater. Dr. Mater to the
The hospital setting becomes a stage where even emergency care connects back to a larger corporate presence, as if every service in this world traces back to the same source. That idea becomes even clearer in Tokyo Mater, where Mater finds himself in a neon-filled city packed with advertisements and fast-moving energy. Among the bright signs and crowded streets, one detail stands out in the background: a Stop and Shop ad by Buy n Large.
Well, here you go.
The city feels alive with commerce. Every corner filled with products and offers, and B&L sits among them like part of the city's structure. It blends into the advertising noise, shaping the environment without calling attention to itself, which makes its presence feel natural in a place driven by constant consumption. The pattern grows stronger in Toy Story 3, where the story shifts to Andy's childhood toys facing an uncertain future. During a moment where Buzz Lightyear is reset into his factory mode, his back panel opens and reveals his power source. Printed on the batteries is the label B&L Alkaline.
No! Slide the switch.
The detail sits inside a character who represents imagination, loyalty, and childhood memory. Yet even he runs on energy tied to the same corporate name. The toy world, which once felt separate from large systems, now carries the same mark at its core. The same detail appears again in the Toy Story video game connected to Bonnie's house, where Buzz's batteries still carry the same branding, reinforcing the idea that this presence stretches beyond a single scene or format. Even in Pixar documentaries, the name appears in production spaces. In A Day in the Life of John Lasseter, a casual look into the animation department shows a whiteboard with B&L written on it. The setting here is not part of a fictional world, but a behind-the-scenes creative space. The appearance of the name in this context suggests it is a shared idea within the studio, moving between development and storytelling and finding its way into different projects over time. That same subtle repetition continues in Small Fry, where Buzz Lightyear gets replaced with a miniature version of himself after a fast food mix-up. Inside the environment of the play area and vending machines, B&L appears again as B&L Burst on a machine in the background. The scene moves quickly, and the scene can be easily missed, but the branding remains steady in the corner of the world, placed where children would interact with everyday items. A darker tone appears in Toy Story of Terror, where the characters find themselves trapped in a roadside motel. As Woody and the others explore the Sleepwell Motel, a B&L logo appears in the window of the motel door. The environment already carries tension, with strange noises and disappearing toys, and the presence of B&L adds another layer to the setting. Also, Cars 3, Toy Story 4, Elio, and Lego The Incredibles all have moments where B&L slipped into one of the scenes in a subtle way. When all of these appearances come together, a clear pattern begins to form. B&L appears through objects, backgrounds, and small environmental details. It moves through hospitals, cities, toys, racetracks, bedrooms, and even production spaces. Each appearance carries a small piece of information, but together they build a larger sense of history. The important part lies in how these moments connect without explanation. No character pauses to describe the company. No scene turns into a history lesson. Instead, the audience gathers information the same way someone might notice repeated symbols on old buildings or in forgotten objects. Each detail adds another layer, and over time, those layers form a larger picture of influence stretching across different worlds. This approach creates a sense of depth that grows naturally. The presence of B&L becomes a thread running through environments rather than a story being told directly. That thread links objects together across films, building the idea of a shared history without ever needing to stop and define it. But the question still remains, why go through all that hassle when WALL-E already told us what B&L was all about? The answer is something many might never have thought of, but when you hear it, it starts to make sense. At the end of the day, what began this company known as B&L is what ends it. That idea becomes way more interesting once you realize WALL-E already showed us the ending first. The movie came out in 2008, but its story takes place in the year 2805. Pixar dropped us into the aftermath when Earth had become a dead planet, buried under towers of garbage. Humans floated through space inside automated chairs, while machines handled every task for them. By and large controlled food, travel, shopping, communication, and eventually even the government itself. By the time WALL-E begins rolling through those empty streets, the damage had already happened centuries earlier. But Pixar wanted to show us how this corruption happened by B&L through other movies. At first, it looked like they created a harmless Easter egg for fans. A logo here, a battery there, and a racetrack sponsorship somewhere else. However, once all those appearances are connected together, another picture starts forming. WALL-E becomes the final warning at the end of it. So every movie afterward became a tiny piece of history leading toward that future in reverse. And the clever part is how natural it all looks. Nobody inside those movies stops to question the logos because corporations already exist everywhere in real life too. People grow used to seeing the same names on food, phones, sports arenas, toys, apps, and television. Pixar understands that dynamic, so instead of screaming the message directly at the audience, they let the audience slowly notice the pattern themselves. That is where Pixar becomes dangerous in the best possible way. They trust viewers enough to connect the dots. The audience slowly realizes B&L keeps getting larger with every appearance. First construction, then batteries and entertainment, food and consumer products, and finally government control in WALL-E. And by the time humanity notices how large the company has become, the world already sits under mountains of trash while giant robots clean up the remains. Pixar could have explained this entire timeline through narration. They could have forced a scientist character into the story to explain the dangers of consumerism and corporate expansion, but they almost never choose that route because they love visual storytelling too much. The studio built its reputation on showing ideas through actions, objects, expressions, and silence instead of endless explanation. And once you notice that storytelling style, you start seeing it everywhere across their movies. Take Up from 2009. Carl and Ellie's marriage montage lasts only a few minutes, yet somehow it tells an entire lifetime story stronger than many full movies manage in 2 hours. Pixar barely uses dialogue during the sequence. Instead, the audience watches Carl and Ellie paint their mailbox together, fix up their house, save coins for their Paradise Falls trip, then lose those savings repeatedly to life emergencies. One moment shows them dancing inside their tiny living room after fixing up the house. Another shows Ellie sitting sadly inside the hospital after learning they could never have children. Later, Carl helps Ellie walk uphill as they grow older together. Then eventually, Carl sits alone in church holding a balloon. Pixar never pauses the montage so Carl can explain how much Ellie means to him. The audience already understands it completely. That same storytelling philosophy powers the BNL timeline as well. Pixar trusts viewers to observe instead of simply listening. Toy Story 3 gives another perfect example of showing without telling during Andy's goodbye scene. Andy arrives at Bonnie's house planning to give away the toys he grew up with. Then something beautiful happens. Instead of dropping the toys off quickly, Andy kneels down and starts playing with them one final time.
Dr. Porkchop's attacking the haunted bakery!
Pew, pew, pew. The ghosts are getting away! Woody, stop them!
The audience understands exactly what that moment means. Childhood is ending, and a new child is receiving the same happiness Andy carried for years. Pixar never forces Andy into a big speech about growing up because the actions already carry the emotion perfectly. Ratatouille works the same way through Anton Ego. For most of the movie, Ego looks terrifying. His face stays cold and sharp, and every worker inside the restaurant panics when he arrives. Then Remy's Ratatouille reaches his table. Ego takes one bite, and suddenly the movie flashes back to his childhood kitchen. Back in the restaurant, Ego drops his pen, and that move tells the audience everything. The harsh critic who spent years tearing chefs apart suddenly reconnects with childhood memories through a simple dish. Again, Pixar lets visual storytelling carry the meaning naturally. And honestly, that exact approach explains why the BNL lore works so well across Pixar's movies. Every single one of these examples proves that the animation studio values the power of sight over sound. They could say the lore out loud, but the visual puzzle is much more exciting for the audience to solve. When we apply this exact same filmmaking rule to the corporate symbols hidden across the movies, the timeline becomes clear. The mega company starts by taking over the land. Then they take over the stores, and eventually they take over the world. Consumerism slowly replaces the regular government because the citizens keep buying the products without looking at the warning signs in the background. By the time the future arrives, the planet is completely silent, empty, and waiting for the machines to clean up the corporate mess. But there is another character hiding something even more surprising than a logo in the background. Lord Farquaad turns out to be a perfect case study in controlled chaos and audience manipulation. This video here breaks down how he became the forgotten master of rage bait.